Ladies and gentlemen, if you grew up in the Southeast during the 1980s, chances are, and you like baseball, chances are you watched the Atlanta Braves. Their games were on TBS pretty much every night, and you suffered in the mid-'80s and late '80s as they were one of the worst teams in baseball. And then something happened. They went from the bottom of the pack to making it to the World Series in 1991. They appeared in the World Series every year. There was a World Series through 96 and one, of course, in 1995. And one of the big reasons why was our guest today, Tom Glavine, two-time Cy Young Award winner. He was the World Series MVP in 1995 when the Braves won the World Series, first ballot Hall of Famer, and he's a proud Florida resident. And so I'm glad he's here to talk about his career, talk about the state of baseball, and then talk about some of the things that he has going on up in Northwest Florida. So welcome. It's been reported in the press. You were an Atlanta resident for a long time. You and your wife would vacation down to Alice Beach, and I guess at one point she and you determined, why are we vacationing here? Why don't we just live here?
Yeah, that was my question. We were, because so many of my friends had come down here, and everybody kept telling us, "Oh, you need to go down to the Panhandle." We're like, I don't know, Florida. Went there a lot for spring training. Not sure I want to live there or whatever. And we came down to the Panhandle. I was like, oh my goodness, this is different than anywhere we've been in Florida. So we fell in love with it pretty quickly and ended up getting the place. And like everybody, we're back and forth. And our kids were younger, so it would have been tough to make the move before we did. But, I finally asked one too many times, why are we going back to Atlanta? And she said, really? I said, yeah. And the rest is history, as they say. So here we are, and we've been here about 5 years now. It's been great.
So when you were at Atlanta, was your whole career in Atlanta at the Disney Wide World of Sports for spring training?
No, when I first started playing, we were in West Palm Beach.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and it was great. I loved it down there. It was a lot of fun, a lot of good golf courses. And then, moved to Orlando and the whole Disney thing, which is a little bit different than what we were accustomed to. But, eventually you get used to it. And
probably harder to travel to the Grapefruit League games because I guess you probably had the Tigers but most of them were on the coast, and
Lakeland,
so you guys are kind of in the middle of the state.
Yeah, Lakeland and the Tigers were close, and then everything we either had to go to Tampa or we had to go back to the East Coast. So we were kind of right in the middle of nowhere. So, when you were
with New York Mets, you were probably Port St. Lucie.
Port St. Lucie there, so it was a little bit better again being on the East Coast, but it was kind of thing that you deal with it. You spend, you look forward to that time every year coming down here and getting into good weather. So spring training was always a good time of year.
Well, Northwest Florida has some of the best beaches in the world. I mean, it's just when people see it, it had been kind of a hidden secret for a while, but certainly not anymore. And I remember during COVID, if you were in 30A in May of 2020, you wouldn't know there was COVID.
No.
There were places, Texas, Louisiana license plates, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. Everyone kind of converged on Northwest Florida, and it really boomed. I think the summer of COVID was the most successful summer for tourism they ever had, and it's just become a really popular destination.
Super popular. And we kind of got to see the end, I think, of the quietness of it, because that's right when we came down. We were coming down that summer. And ironically, I was down because my middle son was on spring break from Auburn, and he wanted to go down, and I was like, yeah, you can go, but you're not going by yourself with your buddies to our house. I said, I'll go down, you can do your thing, I'm going to be there. Well, that was right when everything shut down, so I never went back to Atlanta. And about a week or so later, everything in Atlanta shut down, so then my wife came down with our youngest, and to your point, I mean, there was people everywhere, and cars from everywhere, and it was kind of nice because it was a little bit quiet because nothing was open, but there were still a lot of people around. But so we got to experience that, and then I think maybe one off season after that it stayed quiet. But it's gotten to be a year-round destination down there, which is good. It's good and bad. It loses a little bit of the quaint little town, so to speak. But it's been good for property values and all that stuff, so you can't complain too much.
Well, that is true. So you obviously had a big baseball career. You also got drafted in hockey. We've got the Florida's in the Stanley Cup
Yeah.
Finals up 2-1. So what was when you were growing up, were you more into baseball or hockey, or was it kind of a split? I mean, how did the seasons, I guess the winter season up in New England, you're not playing much baseball anyways, and so it's probably a pretty good thing to be doing?
Yeah, so I think hockey season was a little bit longer. Hockey ran from September to beginning of April. Baseball was mid-April to end of July, maybe. The Little League schedule, but it depended. It depended on what season it was in. If you asked me, I would have told you that sport that I was playing was my favorite sport. But I think, truth be told, I liked them both pretty equally. I think I liked pitching because it reminded me of playing hockey. In hockey, you step on the ice, you're in it, whether you want to be or not. You're in the action. In baseball, pitching was kind of the same way. You're in the middle of everything that's going on. So I think I liked both those aspects of it. But, as I grew up and got into high school, I was more recruited for hockey than I was baseball. But I think simply because back then, you weren't committing to a college as a freshman or sophomore, So they were watching you, and college hockey teams had the opportunity to watch me through my senior year, whereas in baseball, they really only could watch me through my junior year. So, I was a much more of a unfinished product in baseball. I was a raw talent as a pitcher. I didn't really know what I was doing. I threw hard, and I just went on the mound and pitched, and I might strike out 15 guys, and I might walk 8. That was just what I was. So, but as a hockey player, I was much more polished and much more of a finished product, so to speak. So, but I loved hockey. When I started going through that process, my biggest thing with college was I was not ready to give one up, and I was trying to find a school that I could go play both. And looking at it now, I was probably naive thinking I could do it. But back then, there was probably a little bit more of a chance to do it than today, where sports are year-round now and training and all that stuff. But I really loved both of them, and I really wanted to play both of them in college. But once I got drafted by the Braves and really started to try, look in pros and cons of both sports, the one thing that kept jumping out at me was I was a left-handed pitcher. Yeah. And I figured, that's a pretty big advantage, so to speak, in baseball that I don't have in hockey. Probably should try and make use of that, and thank God it worked out.
What's the if you get drafted, what round did you get drafted in?
So I was a 4th round pick in hockey, second round pick in baseball.
Okay, so second round pick, that's a good shot at the big leagues, but it's not guaranteed in baseball. What about hockey? I guess a 4th round pick, would you have had a clear path to the NHL, or is that a difficult hill to climb?
It's probably a little more difficult hill to climb, but it's different. Like as a second round pick, it's a high pick. It's a pick that a team does not want to lose out on. So once the Braves drafted me, the full court press was on to sign me. In hockey, they own your rights for 5 years, so there's no hurry to sign you, so to speak. In fact, I got a call, told me I was drafted, say, we know where you're going to school, we'll watch you, we'll talk to you after your junior year. It's, okay, fine. And then after I subsequently signed with the Braves, I got the phone call back from the Kings saying, we wish we had known, maybe we would have made a push. But, I think it's a little bit different road in those two regards. But I guess as a second round draft pick, like I said, I know you're smart enough to know, hey, I'm a high draft pick. They invested a good amount of money in me. I knew I was going to get every chance to get to the big leagues. I still had to earn it, but I knew I was going to get every opportunity to earn that. And then once you get there, you have to stay there. So I think the big thing for me was I just went into it saying, all right, I'm going to give this thing, after I talked with my parents, 5 years, and if I'm not moving, I need to get out and go to school, because if I wait too long, I'll never go back. But fortunately, I never had to cross that road.
So you, when you broke into the big leagues, Atlanta was not exactly clicking on all cylinders. But then, we got into the early '90s, and it was largely because, you guys had good starting pitching. So you had Avery, I think Smoltz initially too, and then you eventually got Greg Maddux, and so that was really a fearsome rotation. And you guys were from 91 through, I guess, 96, you were pretty much the toast of the National League. So, what was that like going from kind of worst to first to where you guys were in the doldrums to all of a sudden you guys really were America's team?
It was crazy. It was unexpected. I say unexpected. I think the timeline was unexpected. It happened much sooner, I think, than any of us envisioned it. Probably 2 or 3 years sooner. But yeah, when I got to Atlanta, we had Dale Murphy, and that was it. That was the only reason people came to Fulton County Stadium, was to see Murph, and for good reason. Murph was a heck of a player, 2-time MVP.
I think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
I do too.
I mean, when I was a kid watching the Braves, they were actually pretty good in the early 80s. I think they made the playoffs in 82. Then, I started to come of age. I'm like 7, 8 years, and, they were not good.
No.
But, you knew you were going to get Pascual Perez throwing.
Yep.
You knew you had, Bob Horner. But Murphy really was.
Yeah.
He was the class of the team.
He was the team, really, and the face of the organization, and, the classiest guy I think I've ever met, and still represents the game and the Braves as well as you could ask anybody to. So from that standpoint, I think he's would be a great Hall of Famer. But yeah, no, we were not very good there in the 80s, and then towards when I got called up in 87, a lot of the guys that I was playing minor leagues with were right there. So they, some of those guys started to come too, like, the Ronnie Gantz and the Dave Justices and myself, and then Avery. And so you could see the nucleus of good young players were coming. And in fact, in 1990, when Bobby took over as the manager, the second half of that year, we pitched really well and we played good baseball. Now that gave you optimism going into 1991, and then when we made trades and got Pendleton and Rafael Belliard and Sid Bream and guys that were really good defensive players, you thought, okay, well, we can be competitive. And I think realistically, we thought, well, we can move up to the middle of the pack in our division. Maybe,
and that was, you were NL West at the time.
Yeah, we were in the
right?
West. Maybe we could get over 500. So those were, I think, our immediate goals. But then, everything just kind of took off. The pitching staff took off. All of us young guys started to figure it out a little bit. And I think in large part because, for the first time we had all those guys that I mentioned playing the infield. And it was, oh, my God, you make a play behind me. And this guy can catch the ball. And it gave us a lot more confidence just to pitch more aggressively and do some of the things that we needed to be doing on a more consistent basis. But, like I said, it was, if anybody told you we thought we were going to win that year, they were lying. I think we knew we were going to be better, but, to kind of do that whole worst to first thing and end up in the World Series. Because people ask me all the time, what was your favorite year? And obviously it's hard to not say 95 when we won the World Series, but I think had we won in 91, that's a Hollywood script, the worst to first. And unfortunately, the Twins got to live it.
That's right.
Because they did the same thing. And unfortunately, we didn't win. But
I think many people may remember, but that World Series, Atlanta versus Minnesota went 7 games. And you guys had to play in the Metrodome, Game 7. And Jack Morris was their pitcher, and he pitched. And they had Kirby Puckett and stuff. And that was that must have been an interesting environment to have to compete in.
Yeah, because we played, obviously had the Astrodome, but when my first major league start was in the Astrodome, and they were in the playoff run at the time, and it was loud. Not sure we really ever experienced that again in that ballpark before we started playing Houston all the time, seemingly in the playoffs. So to go to Minnesota and hear how loud it was and how hard it was to communicate and do all those things, it's a challenge. And it was a goofy ballpark, the way it was laid out and what have you. But, it's one of those that we didn't win, unfortunately, but I think it went down as one of the best World Series of all time.
It was a heartbreaker for people down in the Southeast.
Yeah.
We didn't have a major league team in Florida until, I guess, 93, probably with the Marlins. I'm growing up in the Tampa Bay area, so that's a far away. And then the Rays came, I think, in 97. But I think for most people in the 80s and 90s, most of them were Braves fans. That's just the way it was. And so you guys were obviously on the cusp there. And it was I think either 92 or 93, you added Greg Maddux, who was obviously one of the best pitchers in the league. So you had you had Smoltz, you had Maddux, you had Avery. I mean, the best rotation in baseball. We've talked about it. So like, if you're pitching that day, you're all just ready, you're doing your thing. When it's not your day to pitch, what are you guys doing during the day before the game?
We're golfing somewhere. That was the thing. I mean, that was our release from the stress of the season. And Smoltz was in charge of all that. He was unbelievable.
He's an excellent golfer.
He was the best golf concierge in Major League Baseball for 20 years. It was just unbelievable. I mean, we would, we'd pack our golf bag before we packed our suitcase to go on a road trip, and then we'd get on the plane, and you'd get on the plane and you're playing cards, you're doing your thing, and then when you hear the wheels go down, it would be Smoltz, what do we got tomorrow? At 6 o'clock in the lobby, cars coming, we're going to play Pine Valley or Oakmont or one of these great golf courses. So it was phenomenal what he did.
And was he a scratch then?
Not quite.
Okay.
He was good though. He was still better than all of us, but he's just so off the charts competitive. But it was great. I mean, we'd go to some of these cities and you're playing. I've looked. The list has changed a lot in the last bunch of years. But you go into Golf Digest and you look at their top 100 courses in the country. Back then, we probably played easily half of them. So we have the U.S. Open this week at Oakmont outside of Pittsburgh. So if you guys are playing the Pirates. And Avery's pitching that day, it's going to be you, Maddux, and Smoltz at Oakmont. Probably. Yeah. So when you're going on a trip and the day you're pitching, you just hope you're not missing an Oakmont or a Pine Valley. That was always this thing you held your breath on it because it'd be like, dang, I can't go to Pine Valley this time. But all these cities had so many great golf courses, and the pros at all these clubs were all big sports fans and baseball fans. So it was like, hey. Get you a couple tickets to the game, and now it was a little harder to do in the '80s because nobody wanted to come to Braves games. But when we got good, it was a good ticket, so people enjoyed the. Now, when you guys were home for home stands, was there one specific course you guys were all members at that you'd play? No, we were all kind of spread out, and I didn't play a ton when we were home. Yeah. That was kind of home, family, kids, all that kind of stuff. So you'd sneak out every now and then, but you try to get your fill on the road. So. Because I kind of think about it both ways. Like as a pitcher, you're making your living. I mean, obviously there's a lot of pressure, but if you pitch well, then you got some days where you can kind of let it off. Whereas an everyday player, you're up there, you got to get hits, you got to do all that. But on the flip side, if you have a bad outing as a pitcher, then you got to wait 4 or 5 days to be able to come out there and redeem yourself. I mean, just the lifestyle of being a big league player, do you think it's the pitching lifestyle is preferable to being an everyday player? Those everyday guys will complain about us pitchers being able to golf and do all those things. And, I would always tell them, listen, I'm pretty sure you guys all pitched at some point in time in Little League. You just picked the wrong position. Don't blame me, right? Because that's your fault. So, they would always try to give us some crap about that. But, I think it was the kind of thing that they knew what we were doing and they appreciated what we were doing. But I think it was for us playing golf, it was just such a release, an outlet from the stress, because it is tough. I mean, as an everyday player, you do have the grind of playing every day, and that's not easy. On the flip side, as a starting pitcher, you have that emotional roller coaster that you just talked of. And when you had a good game and you have, what I call a dig me day, that next day you're floating around, you're happy to do your workouts, you're doing all your things, and, enjoying a couple days before you go back out there. But when you have a bad one, it's a long 5 days. And that part got hard. That emotional roller coaster wasn't the easiest thing to deal with. I think there were times in my career where I got better at it, times where maybe I wasn't so good at it, and I would let it fester for too long. But it's the kind of thing that I think you mentally, as a starting pitcher, you try to make up your mind, good or bad. You're either going to enjoy it or you're going to learn from it and be mad about it until the next day, and then that game starts the next day, and once that game starts, it's over, and you got to start getting ready for your next start. So that was kind of a good rule of thumb. I'm not saying I was always perfect at it, but I think that was the tough part of being a starting pitcher when you had a bad day.
So you won 2 Cy Young awards in the '90s. Obviously, there were a lot of great pitchers at the time, and you guys won 1 World Series. Would you trade one of the Cy Youngs to have won another World Series? I mean, I think most people, kind of like the team stuff. But at the same time, it is what it is.
I would definitely trade one for another World Series. I don't know if I'd trade both for 3 World Series. I don't know.
Well, all the World Series that you guys, came up short in, just as a fan, it seemed like the '96 one. You guys, I think you won 2 games at Yankee Stadium. And a lot of people were like, okay, the Braves are going to win. And then you lost 4 straight.
Yep.
Was that the one you guys think got away more than the others?
I do. Yeah. And I think most guys would tell you the same thing. 91 could have gone either way. And that's the thing about when you get into the World Series, other than, I think 99, we got swept by the Yankees. And honestly, if we look back at that team, I don't think we really understood how we got that far because we had a lot of things going on. We had a lot of injuries that year.
And the Yankees were kind of at their peak.
They were really good. So it was like, how did we even get here? And then, so you never want to get swept, but I don't think that one we kick ourselves over. But yeah, the 91 one, the 92 one, like the difference in winning and losing is so minuscule. And most of the time, you can go through a series and you can legit pick out 1 or 2 pitches that if we'd have made, or 1 or 2 key hits that we didn't get, and that's the difference. And I think in 91, it could have easily gone either way. You go to Game 7. 92, Toronto, same thing. We were on the verge of going up 2-0, and then Ed Sprague, I think, hit a late home run in Game 2, and we ended up going to Toronto 1-1 instead of 2-0. That changed the scope of that series. But, 96, I think we kick ourselves because you go into Yankee Stadium, take 2 games up there. That was Andrew Jones's coming out party.
Right,
19-year-old kid. Nobody knew who he was. And then, the next 4 games were just a little bit of everything. I pitched Game 3, and we lost 3-2. I think we had the bases loaded, nobody out in the 7th inning, didn't score. Yeah. Game 5, I think, was the game that we had a big lead, and there was a fly ball down the right field line that got dropped. Next thing you know, the Yankees score 5 or 6 runs, and it's a different game. And then I think the last, the 5th game in Atlanta, we lost maybe 1-0 or something like that. So it was, just, again, to my point, those minuscule things that if they go your way. But, yeah, I think going to Yankee Stadium and winning 2 games on the road in Yankee Stadium, that's the one I think we all kick ourselves over.
So I think one thing people don't know as much is that they do award Silver Slugger awards for pitchers, and so you won that a number of times. I think one time you hit like 280, and you hit 250 a couple years. I mean, so you were considered a good hitting pitcher, and that was before there was the designated hitter in the National League. Is that just from hockey, or is that just from being a good athlete? I mean, would you practice hitting, and how did you approach that?
I think all of that. I think a lot of stuff that I did in hockey carried over to baseball. Certainly hand-eye coordination, certainly competitiveness. I think all that stuff helped me in baseball. I was a good hitter in baseball. I mean, I was, when I got drafted as a pitcher, I was not real thrilled about that because, I liked hitting and I liked playing every day. So that notion that, okay, you're going to pitch and you're going to only play once every 5 days, that didn't sit well with me initially. But it was the kind of thing that I had some basis of being able to hit a little bit. Didn't hit much in the minor leagues, so you kind of lose some of it. You get to the big leagues, you start hitting again. And I think for us, the key was when Bobby took over, one of our coaches was Jimmy Williams, and he was our third base coach. And Jimmy made it a point that he would take us starting pitchers twice in between our starts. After batting practice was over and you come in and, now you're changing and getting ready for the game, he would grab 2 guys, bring us down in the batting cage, and we would hit for a half an hour. We'd work mostly on our bunting because that's what we had to do. That was the purpose for the most part. But then we would work on our hitting, and I think that there was something with all of us, because all of us, and I say all of us, every guy that was in our rotation seemingly in those years, so different from now. We all played other sports, so we were all good athletes. But we all on our high school teams played another position and hit third or fourth in our lineups.
Right.
I don't think there was anybody in the rotation at any given time during those years that wasn't like that. Now, all these guys come up to the big leagues and they play travel ball and they're pitchers only. Right. They never hit. They never experienced any of that. So, that was ingrained, I think, in all of us. But I think we all made it a point to be at least competitive in the batter's box, right? Like I always said, the biggest thing I have to know how to do is got to lay down a bunt. I got to be able to bunt. That's going to win me some games. That's going to keep me in some games. But if I can be a tough out and make that other pitcher have to work a little bit, maybe throw 5 or 6 pitches to get me out, then I've done my job. So,
and there were pitchers that you would face when you were pitching where you knew you could just throw 3 strikes and they had
here you go.
chance.
And then there were some guys who could hit.
Yeah.
There's guys always sprinkled in there you had to worry about. But yeah, there was nothing better than, you're looking at a lineup and you're trying to manage a lineup and you get into a game and you start to get into trouble and it's the bottom of the lineup and you're looking at things and you're going, oh, well, this pitcher's he can't hit. That's a strikeout there. I can mark that guy. No, I only have to get one more out, and so I didn't want to be that guy. I don't think any of us wanted to be that guy where they could just count on, oh, I can throw 3 pitches and be done with him and move on.
So just you've been around baseball. You're a Hall of Famer. You're on the Hall of Fame committee. You were part of the negotiations in the 90s when they had the strike. Down in Florida, we've got the Tampa Bay Rays franchise, which a lot of people said is kind of a distressed asset. There's a lot of issues with attendance over the years. They've actually produced a good baseball product,
really
given
good.
their very limited salary for the team. Hurricane Milton came, kind of blew the roof off the stadium, so now they're playing in Steinbrenner Field. And so the question is what is the future of that? Just as a guy that's kind of seen what works or what doesn't work, what do you think needs to be done with the Rays? Because I grew up in the Tampa Bay area, and you look at Tampa Bay Lightning hockey, it's like a huge ticket,
mm-hmm.
right? There are way more baseball fans in Tampa Bay when I was growing up than hockey fans, but yet they had a good owner. They made it something. I personally think it can succeed, but I think they got to find a different formula.
Well, first, to your point, they've done a fantastic job running that organization on such a limited budget. They've done such a good job of competing in arguably the division in baseball that spends the most money. So they've done a really good job at that. Now, the hard part is sustaining that year in and year out, and that's where, the finances of the game become difficult and hard to maneuver around. But they have done a great job. But to your point, I would say, and knowing I don't know everything about it and all the circumstances, but to me it seems like it's that old cliche, location, right? And I think the one thing I keep hearing consistently is people just don't want to go all the way out there to a baseball game. I know there's been a lot of effort to move the team to the Tampa Bay area or somewhere over there, and I know it's gained some momentum and then it's fallen off and what have you. Excuse me. To me, that's the key. I think the team's got to end up somewhere over in that Tampa area.
Do you think it's helped Atlanta when they went from Turner Field to Truist? Because I think it was more downtown, and then now it's Cobb County, and it seems like with the battery and everything, it seems like that's worked out well for them.
It's worked out really well, and I think for me, the experience I had initially at Fulton County Stadium and then Turner Field, and Turner Field was great. It's a great ballpark. The problem was your sole goal was how fast can I get there and how fast can I get out of there, Whereas the battery, it's a destination now. People are getting there early. They're staying there late. The vibe around the ballpark is great. So I think all those things add to it. And I look at some of the parks around when I played. Colorado has a similar setup. They've got a lot of restaurants and bars around the ballpark, so it's a good environment around the ballpark. Pittsburgh's new ballpark, they've done a fantastic job.
Incredible.
Not only with the ballpark, but around the ballpark. Yeah. So I think that's the key. When you have these standalone ballparks, they're less desirable to go to, and in particular, if you've got to travel to get there, I think that makes it even harder. I think people would be willing to travel a little bit if there was a reason for them to get there early. When you're having to travel somewhere and you're having to time it. Well, what time do I need to leave to beat traffic? And then how much time does that give me to get to the game? Then I got to drive all the way back in traffic. If you put people in a position where, okay, well, I got a little bit of a drive, but you know what? I'll go early and we'll have dinner, or I'll have a beer, and I'll hang around, and then, I think that's much more desirable. So I think that's the key, is that Tampa's got to find a place that they can do something like that, or at least have something around it other than just a standalone ballpark that's, I think has been their biggest detriment in terms of trying to get people consistently to the ballpark. And listen, new ballparks will do it for a little while, but it's not going to do it forever. And I think that's the key thing you got to try and navigate around.
What's your sense about baseball's trajectory? I mean, I look back, when I was a kid, baseball is still considered the national pastime. Now, I mean, we're a football country right now. I mean, there's no question football far and away number one. I think back, I look at like some of the youth, and I know that we have a lot of people that specialize and like they go to travel teams and all this stuff. But I think about like if like Willie Mays was growing up now, would he play baseball even, or would he be in football or some other sports? So what's your sense about baseball going forward, the health of the game, and obviously there's economics that play into it with the viability of the big league franchises, but just from a youth perspective, it just seems to me that when I was growing up, baseball was probably a bigger deal than it's been. I think people are doing other sports now.
I think it's on a couple different levels where the dynamics change for me. I still feel like it's a desirable sport for most kids because it's affordable. It's expensive to play a lot of other sports. I know for me playing hockey, or even for me as a parent with my kids playing hockey, hockey's expensive. Obviously, not everybody in the country is playing it, but in the pockets where they do, it's an expensive sport. So baseball is still very, very affordable. I think where baseball can run into problems at the youth level is they play too many games. And kids are getting burned out. Parents are getting burned out. So I think that's a concern that needs to be addressed a little bit. But then if you move along, I think where baseball loses some good athletes is if you have guys who are good at, say, baseball and football. I don't know how many guys play a lot of baseball and basketball. But I think that where you lose guys too is when you then say get to the college level or get to maybe high school. If guys are thinking about playing professionally, they're seeing guys go from Saturday afternoon on the college football field to Sunday afternoon on the NFL field, and they're seeing guys in basketball do the same thing. Whereas they see the best player in college baseball and they're like, well, where did he go? 4 years later, 3 years later, you might see him in the big leagues, right? So you're going to play minor league baseball. I don't care how good you are. I mean, Bob Horner, I think, did it, and maybe Dave Winfield were two guys that never played any college or minor league baseball. But you're going to play minor league ball, so I think that's a turnoff for a lot of people. They think, well, why do I want to do that when I can go play this sport, and the following year I'm playing at the highest level I can play. So I think there's some of that. But, I think that it's hard. I know when I went through the negotiations of the strike in '95, that was, there was always this comparison trying to be made between baseball and football. You can't make that comparison. Football plays 16 games a year, and I think that's part of baseball's problem. You certainly have localized fan bases that are crazy about their team. But on a national level across the board, I think people are much more likely to put on a football game on a Sunday afternoon that does not involve their team than they are to put on a baseball game on any given night, because if they don't feel like watching it tonight, they can watch 12 more tomorrow night. And I think because there's so many baseball games, I think that does a little bit to take away from what the NFL has, where it's just once a week, and people get excited about that once a week. And I don't think baseball can try to match that emotional attachment, so to speak, during a football season. I think we get a lot of it in the playoffs, because people are, and I think hockey's the same way. A lot of people will, myself included, will watch a random playoff game with a team that I have no interest in, much more so than I would during the regular season of a baseball season. So I think that's that's an obstacle. I don't know how they overcome
Do
it.
you think the pitch clock has been helpful to speed up the pace of play? I'm trying to think, like when you were pitching, it wasn't. You guys didn't do 3.5-hour games, right?
No.
I mean, you work quicker.
It's funny.
You guys also would pitch deeper into games.
Yeah.
I mean, now it's like they pitch 5 innings, and that's considered like a
Yeah,
quality
it's a great
start.
game. It's like,
Yeah.
big pat on the back. No, it's funny because at some point in time, a couple of years ago, I was getting ready to do a radio show, I think, out of Toronto during the playoffs. And they were hinting about something before I went on. And I went and I looked up the box scores of the 92 World Series. And every game was like 2 hours and 30 minutes, 2 hours and 45 minutes. And that's with an extended break between innings for commercials because it's the playoffs. Like normally it was like 2:15 between innings. In the playoffs, it's like 2:30. So that's an extra 30 seconds every time in between innings, and that adds up. So it was funny when my son, who's playing minor league ball, when he started playing, I would watch some of his games on TV. They had the pitch clock. And I'd be watching these games, and I'm like, oh my God, these games are like, I'm like, the big leagues needs to do this. And then sure enough, a couple years later, they did it. I think it is the best thing that baseball has done in a long time. It's an odd dynamic for me because when I played the game for so long that it's not like I'm going to sit down and watch 9 innings of baseball every night. I'm just not. I don't do it. But I'll watch a little bit. But with the pitch clock, I find myself watching it more because it's crisp. It's a better product. There's not so much downtime. You're not sitting there waiting for the next pitch and saying, oh my God, get back on the mound. Let's go. I think it's done so much good for the game. I think it's brought a lot of fans back, but I think it's just made it a better game because it's crisper. Everybody's kind of into the action, and I think that's probably one of the biggest obstacles for baseball with the millennial or Gen Zs or whatever they are nowadays. They're so used to instant satisfaction that when you have all that dead time, they just don't like it. And I remember thinking, I went to a soccer game, my first professional soccer game, I don't know, 6 or 8 years ago with my boys. And I'm sitting there watching the game, and I came away from it thinking, I understand why people like this because the ball's always in play.
Right. That's right.
It doesn't matter that they only score one time. There's always action. Yeah. And I said, baseball's got to figure out a way to do this. And lo and behold, the pitch clock went a long way to doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more of a traditionalist, but I think it's been a great change.
Yeah.
And I think it's been good. So, Baseball Hall of Fame. So you get in obviously as a first bout Hall of Famer. You had won Cy Young, World Series MVP, 300+ wins. Greg Maddux got in with you the same year. Then Smoltz, and I think on your Braves teams, I mean Chipper, and then McGriff is a
Freddie
Hall
McGriff
of Fame.
Just got in.
So you've got quite a
Andrew
number.
should be getting in here.
Yeah.
Soon, hopefully, we'll see.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
So and then you're on the Hall of Fame committee. I guess what are your duties on that?
It's kind of overseeing the direction of the Hall of Fame, whether it's things that are going on with guys being inducted and those kinds of things, how they're representing the Hall of Fame, what our goal is with that. There's always a discussion about the voting process. There's always guys that think the writers shouldn't do it or they should do more of it or players should have more say. So those are always points of discussion. And then there's the discussions of growing the Hall of Fame itself and the outreach and getting in the communities and all that stuff. But then too, it's, a lot of it is the veterans, the guys who don't get in on their ballot. And then they're put on the veterans ballot.
And that was McGriff was on the veterans
Freddie
ballot?
was on the veterans, yep.
Yeah,
So it's
I
that
think
process and making sure we maintain that and what's the criteria for staying on that ballot even if you don't get a certain amount of votes. So there's always nothing earth-shattering, but there's always stuff going on.
So probably the biggest point of contention with the Hall of Fame in terms of debate is, if you just looked at statistics for the past 30 years, you would see, oh my gosh, this guy Roger Clemens won all these Cy Young, not in the Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds, 760, not in the Hall of Fame. Paul Mayer, some of these guys. And obviously Alex Rodriguez. And there's been a judgment about the use of performance-enhancing drugs, the use of steroids. How do you view that in terms of what makes sense? Because I think on the one hand, some people say, well, if this guy didn't do it, he may not have even been able to have a Hall of Fame career. On the other hand, people can point to like a Barry Bonds and say before he became, the Incredible Hulk, he was still going to be a Hall of Famer because he was a 30-30 guy, 40 whatever. So how do you come down on that? Is the steroid use a disqualifier for the Hall of Fame, or is it just something you have to come to grips with?
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like
when you first came into the league, it was probably just like Canseco that was using steroids, right?
Yeah, I mean there weren't many guys, and then even when it all kind of started, you could still kind of make an argument that, well, is it that or is it the ballparks they're building? Because the ballparks they started building, in Baltimore was probably the prime example. They were bandboxes, so right. I mean it was, wasn't so unbelievable that a second baseman was hitting a home run to the opposite field in those ballparks because the ball flew. So, I mean, you could kind of, but, there were signs. And like when I first got to the big leagues, I could count on my hand the number of guys that I worried about hitting a home run to the opposite field. Then the next thing you knew was like everybody in the lineup could do it. So it was like, all right, something's going on, and I think I was probably a little naive as to the number of guys that were doing it, and I was definitely naive to whether or not pitchers were doing it. I just didn't think there was any benefit to a pitcher because I was always of the mindset, well, you can't go in the weight room and get big and strong and throw harder. It's kind of counterproductive. It's either you're God-given, you throw harder, you don't. Come to find out, there were a lot more guys doing steroids that were pitchers than I imagined. So, I think it's been a touchy issue for sure over the years. People try to equate it with Pete Rose, and I think it's a completely different argument. The older veteran guys are way, way more against the steroid guys, I think, than my generation is. And that's not to say that we condone it or anything, but I think, like, for me, I look at it and it's like I really don't give it a ton of thought, and I think it's because I didn't give it a ton of thought when I was playing. Because what was the point? I could sit there and argue all day long that, hey, I think this guy's doing this and this guy's doing it. It doesn't matter. When I'm out there, I got to get them out. And yeah, they may have hit a ball off of me that ended up being a home run that should have been a fly ball to the warning track or whatever. I can't worry about it. I got to find a way to get these guys out. So I think that was my mindset. Now, would I be thrilled if some of those guys got in? Probably not. I don't think I would be nearly as upset about it, like I said, as some of the more veteran guys. But, I think...
But are you more forgiving of Pete Rose? Did I read that right, that you think that he should do it or no?
I would say I'm probably...
It's just interesting because I remember when it happened and, he was betting on games. Now, he would say it was games he was betting on his team to win, but obviously he had a whole host of things go into that. But now, like, the league has really embraced gambling, and so it's just a difference than when we were in the late 80s.
And I agree with that. And I think that, my stance on Pete has always been, as opposed to these other guys, we have one golden rule in baseball. Every single year, day one, opening day, you come in the clubhouse and the general manager reads Rule 21, I think it was, and it's all about betting. And if you do this, you're banned from the game. So it's the one golden rule. And Pete broke the golden rule. So if you're not going to enforce the golden rule, then don't have the golden rule. And whereas these other guys who did steroids, I'm not condoning what they did. I'm not, and I would be 100% in favor moving forward if baseball implemented a policy that says you get caught doing steroids one time, you're permanently banned from Hall of Fame eligibility. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to have the rules, you got to enforce the rules. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. And I think that's where it's different with Pete. He broke a golden rule. We may not like the rules that these other guys broke as it relates to steroids, but there was nothing at the time that said if you do this, you're banned from baseball or banned from the Hall of Fame. So that's my argument. Now, to your point, I've said repeatedly with people that ask me about it, you want to have a conversation with me and debate with me why you think I'm wrong or I shouldn't feel that way, I'm happy to have that. And if you change my mind, you change my mind. And that to me is one of the things. We all this stuff about betting, and yet every single game, betting is intertwined in the game somewhere.
Every pitch almost.
Everything. Yeah. So it's kind of a little bit of a slippery slope. So I'm interested to see how it moves forward. Like with these steroids guys, it's we don't have to worry about it, so to speak, because they're still the writers are voting on that. But with Pete's going to go to the Veterans Committee.
Right.
And you'll find out how guys feel about it, right? Just like someday you're going to find out with Barry and Roger and everybody else how the guys truly feel about it. So I like that part of the process. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
So in your time as a big leaguer, who was the best player that you ever saw, either on your team or that you competed against?
It's a good question. I mean, obviously on my team, I mean, Chipper's right up there. Maddox is right up there. Guys that I personally faced, hitters. People ask that a lot, and I'll just tell you, if I've got a 1-run lead and there's a guy on second base, I do not want to see Tony Gwynn get in the batter's box. I mean, and not because I don't think I can get him out. I think I can get him out, but I know he's not getting himself out. And as a pitcher, you always want a guy in the box that you've got somewhere to go, that if he's anxious or he's whatever, he'll expand the zone and he'll maybe swing at a bad pitch and he'll get himself out. Tony's just not doing that. You're going to have to make 1, 2, 3, 5 quality pitches, whatever it takes to get him out. So those are the kinds of guys I didn't want to see in the batter's box with the game on the line, and he was the best. He was so good at taking your pitcher's pitch and fouling it off and then making you throw in another one, and knowing that every time he did that, the tide was turning to his favor, that you were going to make a mistake, and he just was so good at it.
Was there a really good player, good hitter that you just knew how to pitch and you did better against him? He had a tough time hitting you?
I don't know if I could single out one guy, but I think there's those ebbs and flows, right? I mean, that was always a thing that I tried to pay attention to. Obviously you had a scouting report, and I would go through a scouting report and look at guys, and I knew, obviously, the great players that you don't want to let beat you in a game, but you also know, well, how did I get him out? But then I really wanted to know, okay, well, what is he right now? Is he hot or is he cold? Because if a guy's hot, I ain't messing with you. I'm going to give you your walk and I'm going to let you go. But if they're not swinging it, which, every hitter goes through that from time to time, Then you might tend to be a lot more aggressive with them. So I think you had a lot of those ebbs and flows, but, I don't know. I think there were times where, like I said, I might have done pretty well against a guy like Piazza, and there were times where he wore me out. So it just depended.
What was it, the difference between playing in Atlanta versus playing in New York when you played for the Mets?
The craziness on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I maintain everybody should have to play 1 year in New York just to see what it's like. Because you go in there as a visiting player and you don't get an understanding for what it's like. You can go in and, listen, the New York Post has some of the greatest headlines you're ever going to read. And, it's funny to go in there as an opposing player and read some of those things and see some of the articles or whatever. But then to go there and play and live it, it's different. But it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a good time for me in the sense that my family was all in Boston, so I saw my family a lot. They would drive down all the time. So that part of it was great. My first year there was terrible, and I had to learn how to deal with the media and all those things. But, the biggest difference, I guess, is, you walk in the locker room in Atlanta at that time, and you would have one newspaper writer, one radio guy, and maybe one online guy. And you walk in the clubhouse in New York, and there's 30 guys in there, And I remember walking in there one day that I was pitching, and I came in after batting practice, and there's like 30 guys in the locker room. I'm like, what are you guys all doing in here? And it's like, it's just a different animal. There's just way more attention on it.
Were the fans more intense in New York than in Atlanta?
Yeah. I mean, we had great fans in Atlanta, but I think the ones in New York were, which, my experience growing up in the Northeast and being a Boston fan, much the same. They're really, really passionate, good and bad. I think the Atlanta fans are passionate, definitely on the good side. They're a lot more forgiving on the bad side. New York, you're hearing it, good or bad, and it's like people always would ask me what it was like playing there. I said, well, not many places better when it's going good, and there is no place worse when it's going bad, so you better stay on the good side as much as you can.
And I mean, it seems like New York and Boston are kind of in a separate league, and just in terms of the fan intensity and the media scrutiny is. I mean, I look at like LA. It seems like it's a little bit more laid back. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I would say that, I think there's probably as much coverage in Boston, but it may not be as crazy a fan, so to speak, as you're going to find in New York. So, but they're still pretty crazy.
So, so you're in Alice Beach, and you've done a lot of charitable support for Seaside School. So, can you talk about what you've done and what the significance of the school?
Yeah. So when I at the time when I said to my wife, "Why are we going back to Atlanta?" We were in Alice Beach, and we've since moved to Santa Rosa Beach. So we're just down the road, but still there. And one of the key things for us to move down here was our youngest son at the time, who was in 5th grade, and where he was going to go to school. He was in a good school in Atlanta. So the Seaside School was the one that everybody talked about, and it's not the kind of place where you can just enroll your kid and get in. It's hard to get in, and there's a lottery and the whole 9 yards. So the best avenue for me to get my son in was to get on the school board. So, at 50-something years old, I'm filling out my first resume of my life. And, it was a really odd thing to do, to have to sit down and talk about me and my experiences and put it on paper, what I'm good at, what I can bring to the table. It was just not something I was really comfortable doing. But at the end of the day, I got on the board, and my son got into school, and we just, like everybody, we fell in love with the school and what they were doing. And it was always there was so much talk for years about whether they were going to expand the lower school and have elementary school and then roll into the middle school, or have a high school. And ultimately, I think a lot of the discussion before I got on the board was about the elementary side. Once I was on the board, for some reason, I didn't have anything to do with it, but the conversation shifted to the high school, and that's where all the momentum went. And then it got some traction in the sense that we got some land, and we've partnered up with Northwest Florida State College, which is a great school. We've had a great relationship with them, and the kids being dual enrolled. But the problem has been that for everybody, Santa Rosa, Walton County, Freeport, all those kids, to go over to Niceville every day is not an easy thing to do. And I know for me as a parent, kind of going through the process and thinking, man, when my son's 16, 17 years old, I don't want him driving 45 minutes a day to go to school in Niceville. So that whole notion of having something closer, not only for me personally, was such a big deal, but then for the kids and the rest of the kids in that surrounding area that were experiencing the same thing. So, we've, again, partnered up with Northwest Florida State College. We've done a lot of lobbying here at the Capitol.
That's right. I've seen that's where I first met you.
So we've gotten a lot of support throughout the state. Thank you. So the school's up, come out of the ground. It's going to open in August. And it's just been a good thing to be a part of. Like I've said in the past, everything I've done charitably has been mostly through me as a baseball player, but little different causes that are great, right? I started out in Atlanta doing stuff with service dogs and helping those people out, and then I moved into prevention of child abuse, and then I moved to the Georgia Transplant Foundation, helping people with organ transplants and all of that stuff. So it's always been like that cause kind of thing. This opportunity, I look at it as more of a legacy thing. Like when I really start to think about the amount of kids that can be impacted by this school and this opportunity, it's just something that I couldn't help but get behind, And like I said, from a selfish standpoint, for my own son, I know what the academic side of it means. But to help be able to bring that to so many kids in that area, and it's one of the fastest growing areas in the state. So schools are busting at the seams now. Just to be able to be a part of that and help make that happen for kids in that area. And also a lot of adults, quite honestly. There's a lot of adults that are always looking to further their education or get into something new. And it was the same thing. Have to go all the way to Niceville or go all the way over to Panama City somewhere. Now we have something in our backyard that I think is going to be great for everybody, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
So you've done a lot of personal charitable donations, and I think you do a golf tournament where you raise money for the school as well.
Yeah. So and that's been fun. That's I was hesitant to do that because I did that in Atlanta for 20 years, and it's just Ultimately, you'd like to get it to the point where it runs itself and people look forward to it every year, and we've kind of gotten there. But you're always pushing the envelope of how do we make it better, and how can we? And can you invite some of your Braves friends? And it's like, I don't want to do that. It's just I'm much more comfortable relying on me being there than I am anybody else. So I'll just leave it at me for now. I'll show up. I'll do the best we can, and we'll raise some money.
Are your rotation mates? I mean, Smoltz still plays a lot of golf, right?
He does.
Maddox play a lot of golf.
They both do. They both play a ton of golf.
And is Smoltz living in the Atlanta area?
He's still there in Atlanta, yeah. And Greg grew up in Vegas, so he's still out there. He was a what do they call it? What do you call it? Army brat? Is that what he was? Yeah. So his dad was in the service, and ultimately ended up out there in Vegas. So that's why Greg grew up in Vegas. But yeah, they're still playing a lot.
And where do you do your tournament the same place every year?
So we've been doing it at Watersound Club has Camp Creek and Shark's Tooth. So we initially did it at Shark's Tooth, moved it last year to Camp Creek because Shark's Tooth was under construction, and it went so well at Camp Creek that we're gonna stay over there at Camp Creek this year.
And so I also read that you were involved, I guess, the community and really have a good burger joint. So you guys launched it. Was that a couple years ago?
Yeah,
when did you do
I
that?
guess it's
what's it called?
It's called Papa Surf.
Okay.
Not everybody wants to call it Papa Surfs or Papa Smurfs. It's not any of those. It's Papa Surf, and it's right
where
there.
Exactly
it's
is it?
right on 30A,
Okay.
over in Santa Rosa Beach.
Okay.
It's a block away from the water, so it's a cool spot. It's I jokingly say I know why everybody said don't get in the restaurant business now, because there's a lot to it, and it's simple things like trying to hire good employees, trying to keep good employees, trying to, you're always looking to make the situation better, but we don't have the space to do it, and how are we going to overcome this problem? And the restaurant itself has been great, and I'm in it with Brian Kelly and Jason Aldean, so it's great partners, fun partners, so it's fun to be a part of something with those guys.
Do they have places in the area too, or how?
No, Brian's wife Brittany has a clothing store over there in Grayton Beach, so she does that. But restaurant wise, no, it's this. I know Jason has one in Nashville, but down here this is the only one. But it's been the product itself is great. Everybody loves the food, and we've got a nice outside bar with a big magnolia tree. There's just a really cool spot. But it's like I said, it's the challenges of keeping good people, and how do you maneuver the off season and all those things. So it's been a learning process, but it's been fun.
Well, thanks for coming by the office. It was good to see you again, and keep us posted on how the Seaside School's doing. We were proud to be supportive of that. I think it's got really important to the community, and congratulations on all the success you've had in baseball, and we're proud that you're a Florida resident.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. It was great being on with you, and always enjoy spending time with you, so thank you.
Okay. God bless.